Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you, or not, rather. So, hopefully, we'll just give everyone a moment to log in and get set up, and then we can kick off.
I think we're ready to go. So would you like to start with a few introductions?
Perfect, yeah. So hi, everyone. So nice to virtually meet you all. My name is Alex Brock, and I am the MD of Omnichannel for Syneos Health in Europe. And my job essentially is overseeing a team of people that help clients across the European business figure out how to do omnichannel better. So as you can imagine, I've spent the last year or so having a lot of interesting conversations with clients around questions like what do we do about virtual congresses, or what do we do when our reps can't access our customers directly? How do we use digital to solve those kinds of problems? And yeah, so I am part of a group called Kinetic, which is a global omnichannel group within Syneos, and I work with my counterpart Lee, who will also introduce herself now.
Sure. Leah Householder. I'm also Managing Director of Omnichannel, but I focus more on the US market. And over the last year or so, my job has really been focused on helping organizations achieve the next model that they're going after. Whether you're thinking about clinical or commercial, we've all been on this really fast flywheel of learning. So we were reinventing our companies and our customer interface. And now we are making sure we have all of the technology, the tools, the processes, the culture in place to help clients really realize the overall potential of what we've learned during this time. But I'll tell you just a little more about Kinetic if we want to jump to the next slide. This is the last about us, and then we'll talk about all the things we've been learning from organizations like yours. But Kinetic is our omni-channel division, and it's built inside of Syneos Health. Syneos Health is a complete integrated clinical and commercial biopharmaceutical development company. And we were very much built on this promise of being able to utilize the full breadth of data that's captured over clinical and commercial experiences to create stronger customer engagements. And of course, to do that, we need advanced technology and analytics, and much of that capability, data, tools, processes, people sit in the Kinetic division. So as you might get to learn more about us, you'll meet a team of people who include data scientists, behavioral experts, channel strategists, who are all working together to really modernize customer engagement and make the kind of omni-channel solutions our clients are talking about fully accessible through all sizes of healthcare organizations.
Great, so that's a little bit about us. Now we'll talk a little bit about our big learnings or things we've picked up in the last year, and then we can talk more about kind of how that applies in terms of the global approach to delivering omnichannel programs. So really what we learned in 2020 is pretty obvious, really. Industry is at an inflection point. So there's kind of two big facets to that, and essentially what it's about is this idea that we've shifted from this kind of one-size-fits-all static websites, hit send to everyone approach, to more of this kind of omnichannel experience. We're talking much more about relevant an individual level. And there's two kind of big things that we've observed, kind of captured in the stats that you've got in front of you here. So from a kind of an industry perspective, there's a survey in 2020 that Actria ran showed that 30% of pharma companies have already deployed some kind of omnichannel marketing in each one franchise, and 25% are planning to do so. I think that's really interesting because from my kind of reflection on talking to clients in Europe, it's very much so. If you wind back to 2019, you talk to people about omnichannel. I think the consensus, or the thing you hear a lot, is people say, well, it sounds great, but it would never work here. What we've seen kind of the flip is now that in 2020, moving into 21, is that clients across the board now kind of get that this is kind of the future, and they kind of think, yeah, we need to start thinking about this actively beyond just dipping toes in the water with pilots. And then, of course, from the other perspective, from the kind of customer perspective, this is a stat that we actually ran a survey in 2020 that kind of just highlights how the appetite for more kind of connected, personalized experiences is increasing. And I think you can kind of extrapolate, this is the sort of thing that is very much behavior that is learned from, your experience in non-pharma and consumer doctors interacting with consumer tech companies. But really kind of put together, what this kind of tells us is that this 2021 is really this time where there's kind of more and more demand and more appetite. And the question that we're really getting from clients across the board is, how do we make this a reality beyond kind of pilot at a kind of grander scale and across the organization? So really this idea of, how do we do this globally? How do we do this consistently in a way that's going to be really effective and also drive a really good customer experience?
And we got a question. This is great to load this next slide, but we got an interesting question from Lode, who's one of the viewers today. And he asked, how do you define omnichannel at Syneos Health? I'd love to hear your answer to it too, Alex. But when I think about it, I think it's all of the unique ways that we're working to understand our customers through data, that we're adapting content to different customer attributes, behaviors, context, and then using that to ultimately orchestrate engagements that are integrated and coordinated across channels. I think we're moving away from a time when we were thinking exclusively of multi-channel, which would simply just be deploying messages in many different channels, but not connecting that back end of rich customer understanding. I think an easier way to describe omnichannel is just to say what it feels like through the customer lens. And I think it feels like relevance, like one-to-one experiences that were created for you. And this time of just absolute information deluge, you can imagine how getting something useful, connected, tailored, personal, feels so much different than getting just another message that was made for everyone. What do you think, Alex? Did I get it right? Is that why you?
That was a stunningly eloquent description of what omnichannel is. I think I would sum it up as 3 words. Basically, it's integration, personalization, automation. That's generally what I'm talking about. I talk about omnichannel. I think your version was much better.
I need an editor in my life. I like that definition. Well, let's jump into the next topic, because we've been talking with life science leaders as well as biotechs and startups about what they're building in order to support omnichannel in their organizations. And when you look across the major themes, the best practice areas they're looking to build out, and we'll show you a double click on this, but the best practice areas they're looking to build out are around audience intelligence, meaning how do I identify my highest value stakeholders and understand the interconnection between them. Synchronized experiences, which is big because it's a big part of the infrastructure, capability, and bravery being built in pharma today to be able to deliver that one-on-one experience. And then performance intelligence, where we're decoding the causal relationships between where we spend money and what value we get. And if I were to describe the plan broadly that I see life sciences moving toward, it's probably the second level here if we want to take a click. So that's starting with advanced targeting, where we're using data, and this looks really different in the US and Europe. So we're gonna definitely talk more about that in a few minutes. But where we're using data to be able to identify the highest value stakeholders at the individual level, the influencer level, the cohort level. So we're able to, if you're thinking about a call plan, be able to literally rank order them. And if we're thinking about maybe a different kind of digital plan or an advisory opportunity, we're understanding the cohorts they work in and where we can have real impact. Synchronized experience starts with a very important stepping stone, and it can be one of the most difficult things to build. This is the ability to automatically collect and connect individual behaviors across channels. Again, looks different by geography, but the thought being, I can't deliver a personalized, tailored experience to you if I don't know what you've seen before, if I don't know which channels you responded most consistently to, if I don't know what matters to you. So being able to take your incoming data feeds and connect them back at an individual level is a big discussion point. And I'll tell you, it's so interesting as I talk to different companies, how different what's being built is in terms of the order. So often in an organization, there's someone who's a true advocate of omnichannel, who is driving the conversations about investment, driving the focus. And so there are some companies I'll talk to who are very good at this on the left. They've built the infrastructure. They have the pipes in place. But then it gets harder on the next click. Once you have that unified view, that's when we trigger the one-to-one automation. And this is delivering on that long-held industry promise of right message, right person, right channel, delivery that goes across platforms. And when you move from the technology end into this triggered moment, you're having that first moment of combining technical mastery with true creativity, which takes us into this mastery of content. In order to be able to be very successful at Omnichannel, what a lot of our clients are running into is, I need more content. I need to have modular content that can be pieced together to create a personalized email. I need to have flexible content that can fit into different media sizes, different connection points. And that can be hard to do, to figure out organizationally how you develop fluency around approving, librarying, and activating motivating modular content at speed and scale. So what I was telling you earlier, some of the clients seem very, very good at the advanced targeting and the unified view. There's actually another subset of life sciences who we've talked to that's pretty good at the middle. They've really cracked the code on content, but without the strong ability to have a unified view and to trigger automation, they're doing it in a very manual way. Using people to be able to individually contact customers and leverage a library of content in a way that is one-on-one, because it is truly one-on-one. And then finally, once all that's in place, performance analytics are how we keep getting better so that we are decoding causal relationships between investment and outcome, and we're able to do differential resource investment against where we think we can really have the best impact.
Okay, so that obviously kind of covers off our thinking or our approach to kind of the best practice areas across those 5. But obviously we understand, and as Leah mentioned, that these don't work in the same way in different regions. So to kind of flesh out a bit more detail, what we've done here is kind of split out a kind of US and Europe rest of the world approach. So what we can do is almost break it down and talk about how these different things may work and identify where are those similarities and differences and levels of consistency. So let's walk through those now over the next couple of minutes.
While we're getting into this, Alex Lees asked a really interesting question. She said, is there a danger that the intensity of omnichannel communication may switch stakeholders off? I think the short answer is, if you do it right, they don't notice it. But it's definitely, the issue is making sure, in my experience, making sure that we're thinking about the total amount of communication that might be going to any one stakeholder. We've seen a lot of data and industry about during this COVID period about just the sheer volume of additional communication that prescribers particularly are getting through the digital channel. And when it's not right, when it's not appropriate and personal and connected, it feels like spam. So I think getting this right can actually make it feel less intense than getting it wrong.
Absolutely, yeah, I'd say for sure. I think coordination is really, really important. So you're not sending different messages from different parts of the business to the same stakeholder. The other 2 things that I think are really important are, firstly, a kind of interlinked is having obviously respect for the customer's time, understanding the context in which they're working, and asking them to participate in things that take up a lot of their time at kind of awkward times or whatever isn't going to be realistic. But also thinking about the value transaction of what you're asking for them. Is the information that you're providing to them just kind of broadcasting more noise and more more messages about you, or is it trying to offer something that is hopefully of genuine clinical value, something they'd be excited to participate in or spend time reading or whatever? So I think between those things, that's the thing we need to always bear in mind in order to not overwhelm our customers and audience.
So let's get into this, the difference between US and Europe and how we can potentially come together to have a global strategy. In the US, advanced targeting, lots of interesting ability on the prescriber side to do individual level targeting using third-party data to literally get that list of named healthcare professionals who are most likely to drive value for the brand. A little more focused on the cohort than the individual level when you're talking about a patient or a carer, but a lot of ability to be able to get to a very incremental level across media.
So obviously then comparing that to Europe and to a certain extent the rest of the world as well, Obviously, because of regulations like GDPR, the extent to which we can do one-to-one targeting is significantly limited. But also, we've got this issue of kind of comparative kind of paucity of data, but also inconsistency of data. So what we have, there's less of it, and it's not the same between markets. So having a consistent approach is difficult. But what we can do, obviously, is targeted media, where we're looking at stuff like self-declared specialism, location, also types of targeting such as contextual, behavioral targeting, based on how people are interacting with websites, for example, where possible. So what this really means is that from a targeting perspective, there's a relatively low degree of consistency between different markets, and we have to have a bit more of a nuanced approach as we kind of think about what does a global approach look like, and where do we need to flex in order to be appropriate on a market by market basis. So if we move on then to unified view. Lee, do you want to talk about the US approach?
Sure. Yeah, in terms of bringing data together about a professional customer, full integration is possible. So we can use a unique identifier, usually connected to an MPI, but most companies are really focused on having their own internal unique identifier connected to that. And any data that's being picked up at the individual level can be mapped back to a single view that we can do resource modeling against. Again, on the patient level, much more cautious about how we link that data versus just respond to things to actions that are being taken across media.
And then in Europe, obviously, I think that the extent to which we can create a unified view is entirely possible within the touch points that we own. So, for example, tracking how someone's using an owned website and how that tracks back into CRM, obviously rep interactions, stuff like email newsletters. These things can all be integrated into CRM, and we can achieve that unified view when we have the permission or the consent to do so. Where we're a little bit more limited is our ability to integrate data from third parties. So, for example, knowing what someone did on a third-party website, when I say someone, I mean a physician, obviously, and being able to integrate that on an individual level back into our own understanding of our customers is very difficult now and impossible, again, due to things like GDPR. However, if you think about it in the round, there is a greater degree, a relatively good degree of consistency in terms of how we can deliver a global approach to that unified view of customers when we're talking about customers within our own kind of ecosystem of channels.
Yeah, triggered one-to-one automation. We have here, in general, when you have a customer opt-in, triggering is very possible across email, text, etc. But one thing that's really been interesting in this market is that we're doing a lot more work with triggering open web media. So a website that you might visit, triggering open web media based on CRM entry and creating a feedback loop there. So it's almost an opt-in-less form of CRM that works for the healthcare professional audience. I saw Crystal mentioning in the chat that when you think about how to do omnichannel well, it's still important to have the rep glue the components together to form the human face of the interaction. And we've seen that to be so true in terms of thinking about automation, that when you have that face-to-face or video visit today with a rep, just having that one encounter makes every other channel we add to it significantly more effective. That technology-enabled rep will definitely be the center of omnichannel in the year to come.
Yeah, and just to reflect, I think exactly the same thing applies in Europe, of course. And yeah, to a certain extent, yeah, for sure, one-to-one automation is possible when we have the appropriate opt-in. I would say, though, based on the conversations we're having with our clients, this is an area that I think is particularly, where we see this sort of stark contrast from, wind back a year, 18 months, very few people actively getting stuck into this kind of approach. Now, a lot of people are much more kind of exploring it more proactively. So certainly it's something that we think will become more prevalent over time. And yeah, so, basically a pretty high degree of consistency in terms of, how we can do that at a global level, obviously respecting, the variances that may exist at a kind of market by market level.
So on to matrix content. This is a great discussion in regulatory organizations today. Obviously, having matrix content is absolutely possible with the appropriate legal review. The question is how many organizations know how to do that appropriate legal review. So we're working with different teams to address that different ways, whether it's showing what might trigger a particular piece of content, or it's showing a specific user's digital journey, so they have a sense of when things might take place. Behavioral science also stay in a very important part within this matrix content area of making sure we understand what motivates people, what motivational style they have.
Yeah, and I think exactly the same applies in Europe. You know, this is entirely possible, but the hurdle really is how we can approve large volumes or large permutations of content in different combinations and permutations in a way that is realistic and feasible for a review person. So again, that is, you know, everything that Lee said, I think completely applies in Europe in the same way. And the challenges essentially are global. So again, there's a really high degree of consistency in terms of when we think about, you know, how these things could work globally. Obviously, it's always going to be subject to the degree of strictness in an individual market, but the principles are always essentially the same. And that takes us on finally then to performance analytics. So do you want to wrap this section up?
Yeah, definitely. So we mentioned earlier that individual level tracking is possible. So we're able to connect digital investments, omnichannel investments to specific prescribing behavior to identify those customers who are really most interested in the content and most motivated by it. We can also do a lot around understanding referral networks and who's impacting who in terms of overall performance.
And yeah, finally, obviously in Europe and to a certain extent the rest of the world as well, you know, we can't track at that individual level. We can only track sales at a brick level, so that's kind of an area level. But of course, there are, you know, other impact data sources available, such as, you know, like looking at referral data and things of that nature. But again, the key thing here is that the sources of data tend to be somewhat inconsistent. So some countries, you know, publish some of this data and other countries don't. So having a global approach is quite difficult. So again, where we get to with this is that there are some things that we can do consistently in terms of analytics, but there is a low overall degree of consistency in terms of how we can measure. So I guess to summarize this little kind of walk through we've done, hopefully this makes sense as an approach. But what you can kind of see there is that, you know, although there are obviously differences in how this works in different markets, where we really get to is that middle bucket, that synchronized experience that you offer to your customer, is where we think the real kind of common ground is for developing and implementing genuinely kind of global omnichannel strategies. And I think that's great, because really what that plays to is our ability to offer a consistent customer experience in all geographies and to all customer types. So that kind of covers off how we think about the constituent elements of a good omnichannel program. There are a couple of more things we wanted to talk about just to kind of wrap this up, because obviously it's not just about these kind of sort of technical or functional things. There's a human element to it as well, and this kind of gets us to this notion of the kind of balancing out between global and local when we talk about implementation. And I've put in there in brackets omnichannel, because I think this is a thing that really, really makes a big difference when we think about omnichannel programs, but it's not a new thing, and it's not a thing that openly applies to omnichannel. And really what it's about is this notion of the balance between a centralized and decentralized approach. So you can see kind of on either side there are kind of pros and cons. So obviously from the centralization is all about delivering a consistent experience, as I just said. The more centralization, the more consistency in terms of experience you can achieve. And obviously there are efficiencies as well in terms of it being very kind of potentially cost effective. But obviously the limitation or the risk is that it can be restrictive, and that you're not able to fully take advantage of local level opportunities, or you create something that's too rigid that won't work in certain markets. And obviously the risk with that is that you produce something globally and then the uptake is low, and that just is a failure, obviously. Then the flip side of the decentralized approach is that you get increased flexibility for sure, and you get increased local relevance, but you get inefficiency through duplication, and you get the potential for this inconsistent experience. And based on our experience working on these kind of regional or global level projects for just day in, day out, I think the key really is the way in which you engage between local and global teams. So this is all about taking input from local teams at the beginning of the process and checking in throughout to understand, where are the things that can be consistent across different markets, and where are the things that need to be flexible, and then how can we apply appropriate guardrails to make sure that we kind of control the level of adaptation in a way that kind of optimizes that balance and keeps it really kind of working in best way. So then the final thing that we were going to talk about very briefly is kind of looking forward to the future. And I'm really pleased with my headline for this slide because it's something I've never had to say or never been able to say before. So the future of customer engagement in healthcare, Europe leading the way. So what this is all about, I think, when we look at some of the, tightening of data protection regulations across the world. So obviously, we've talked a number of times about GDPR, but there are many other similar kind of regulations across the rest of the world. And obviously now increasingly in the US with, the CCPA in California and the more recent one in Virginia as well. Combine this with, the impending kind of what we refer to as the cookie apocalypse. So this is, companies like, like Apple and Google, which are kind of phasing out use of third-party data cookies. It kind of points the direction where, the more kind of the stricter, more stringent environments are actually, the stuff that we've had to kind of work through in Europe is going to be more like what things are going to be like in general. We can kind of project in the future. And the implication of this really is that potentially there's going to be less emphasis on targeting, because stuff like GDPR just inherently makes that more difficult, and potentially an increased importance on your kind of first-party data, i.e. data you own, and this notion of walled gardens. So if you're not familiar with that expression, that's basically where you create a platform or a site or ecosystem site where you can control access through logins, and you have a degree of control over how people interact within that. So we kind of can see that the people or the organizations or institutions that will do well in this kind of new reality are the ones that will have their own first party data or are walled gardens. So you look at the likes of the sort of physician websites like Medscape and the networks and health sites, Thermo, Figure One, all those kind of sites. They already have that in place, so you can predict they will be important in the future. But I think from a pharma company perspective, it kind of begs the question, there's one or two ways you can go. Is either kind of building your own garden or playing in someone else's. So, the latter is most definitely going to play, working with those, those third-party platforms. The former is kind of building your own walled garden, so your own hub, your own portal, whatever, where you can generate that first-party data over time and have that model where you are able to build ongoing engagement. I suspect, though, probably the answer is you should be thinking about both. It's not necessarily a one or the other situation. So obviously, that's kind of just a little taste of what we think the future might look like. But hopefully that kind of builds on our story around the importance of synchronized experiences. I think this is really where, based on everything we talked about, where when we talk about global omnichannel programs in the near future, this is kind of what we think the future looks like. So I think we've just got a couple of minutes left. So I will just wrap up there, and any other further questions, obviously happy to take them.
There's one question that I thought might be nice to leave on because it also connects to a comment that someone left. The question was, in terms of opt-in and unified view, do we have visibility on current experience data on the willingness of HCPs to be tracked and targeted? That was a question from Crystal. And we do. We have data in two ways. And the first kind of data is survey data. We recently talked to 250 US doctors as an example. 60% said they would like to get more communications that were connected to the experience they'd had with the pharma company before. Over half said specifically they'd like reminders and notifications about topics they talked with a rep about. Those are little things. The bigger data is just how much more engagement we get in an omni-channel plan, how much more efficient the spend is, how much more involved the customer is in using it. And I wanted to say that just to close with this nice note from Dennis explaining like his view on what omnichannel is. And he said, omnichannel is not about bombarding your end user with the same message over multiple channels. That's what multichannel is often guilty of. It's about constructing the user journey that uses multiple channels to bring relevant messages to the end user and the most relevant content channel specifically for him or her. And with that, Alex, I'll leave any last words to you.
No, I would say thank you all so much for your time and for the great questions. It was great to talk to you and share a bit of our experience around this stuff. And obviously, you know, we'd be happy to talk about it in any greater depth in the future. So look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Bye for now.
Okay, bye-bye.